Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me for another special History and Games episode. Today I am joined by Max Miller, the creator and host of a very popular, very entertaining, very funny YouTube channel called Tasting History. Hi Max, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm really great. Before we even go anywhere, I have to say for those who are listening, they don't have the visuals, right now behind Max is a giant mountain of awesome Pokémon, and I love it. I see Snorlax. I think I see an adorable Pikachu dressed up as something. I see Bulbasaur. I see a cat that just jumped on that's the ultimate Pokemon is your kitty. How cute. What's your kitty's name?
So that is Jaime, and that is his sister Cersei in the background.
Oh my God, I need a moment to process that. That's fantastic. You named them after Game of Thrones
And
characters.
what's funny is their personalities are perfect. She is aloof and plotting and kind of mean, but in a beautiful way. And he is just like guns blazing, go in, no fear.
This is already just a fantastic start. You're like right in the same wheelhouse of like pop culture that my audience and I are part of. But before we go any further, I wanted to give you a chance to sort of explain to people what tasting history is, because it's really awesome. And I think my audience would really love it.
Yeah. So Tasting History is a YouTube channel where I pick old recipes. There's no real time period. It's from whenever, ancient times, medieval England, the Renaissance, whenever. And I do my best to recreate them, but in a fairly easy way that you could then do at home. And then I talk about the history of the dish or the time period or the culture that it comes from. And it's light, it's fun. There's nothing serious about it until you get to the comments, but don't read the comments.
Oh my gosh, I hear you on the comments part, but you know, it is serious in one way. The thing that impresses me is it's a deep dive into history. That's why I like it so much. It kind of reminds me of my own channel where it's just like, yes, we use a fun vehicle, either video games or food, but like you're very serious about your research.
Yeah, I mean, each episode, I mean, I have a fair amount of kind of backlog of information in my brain because I love to read. I just love to learn, always have. So I have, I'm always able to bring something to whatever episode I'm writing without having to go do research. But then that kind of leads me down the rabbit hole. And usually for an episode, I can do anywhere from 5 or 6 hours to 20 or 30 hours of research before I'm ready to write a script. So sometimes it is pretty deep, and sometimes it kind of meanders because I like to tell a story. I don't like to just spout historical facts or whatever. I kind of like it to have a little bit of an arc because I think for me that's what I like about history is that it's stories. So that's kind of how I try to get it out there.
I think we're twins. That is exactly why I love history too. It's like there's like a narrative arc to it. It's really interesting, but if you don't teach it in an entertaining way, people are like, snore. But if you
Exactly.
do, you're just like, tell me more.
Yeah.
You know, I actually wanted to do something called Ancient Alcoholic, where I like test out like different ancient wines and beers and review them and have fun. But one of the challenges is it's hard to find the ingredients. It's hard to find people who make this stuff. Like, what are some of the challenges that you deal with when you're trying to find and recreate these ancient recipes?
Yeah. So especially with the ancient ones, like before medieval Europe, part of the problem is one, finding the ingredients like silphium. You can't find silphium, it's extinct. And it has
Yeah.
been extinct since the Roman Empire, but there's one called asafoetida that is, or asafoetida, some people say, that's supposedly probably similar to it. I actually just cooked with it for the first time this week. And, even that is not that easy to find. Granted, with the internet, you can get anything pretty much shipped to you, but during quarantine, I started this channel basically at the beginning of lockdown. So getting grains of paradise from Amazon was impossible. There was no place to get it. They said, no, we're shipping toilet paper only. So I ended up I was able to find the a place in Ghana that actually grew them, and then they usually shipped via Amazon. But I emailed them and was like, "Hey, can you ship these directly to me?" And they did, but it took 4 months. So by the time that I got them, everything was Amazon was back to someone. I could have got them overnight, but whatever, you know.
After all of that, but that's a bit like, how do you track down these ingredients? Because that's like, I would not have thought to look in like Ghana or anywhere. I'd be like, well, Amazon or like Chef Shop is just down, so I don't know what to do. Like, what is the process of like trying to track these ingredients down?
So I went to for that and for a few other spices. I went to eBay or not eBay. I'm sorry. Is it Etsy that I went to? No, maybe it is eBay. I went to a few different places, and on there you can actually contact the seller.
Ah.
So even though they were like not doing anything, I was able to contact the seller and be like, "Hey, can you send me these to me?" And they were like, "Yeah, we're in Ghana, and so it's going to take some time." But you know, it was made for a fun story. So, and
No, it makes for an
what
awesome
else have I
story.
got to do?
Yeah, that is persistence. I love that. So I guess it's funny because I was watching your video on Kikion, which is like this very odd, unusual, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, this unusual barley drink from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, where it's like barley mill and it's like premium wine, this sort of wine that they're not totally sure about, and like honey and cheese. And I was watching that, and that seemed to be a very interesting experience. Obviously, not everything you make is delicious and tasty. Well, I mean, maybe to the ancient Greeks were, but your reaction was pretty priceless.
You know, well, so with Kikion, I don't know that it was supposed to be tasty. It's a medicine, really. It's he calls it a potion in the Iliad, I believe, and it was meant to like strengthen people who are on death's door. So not necessarily supposed to taste good. It was more the texture actually that was horrible. But also then there's always the possibility that I didn't make it like they did. In fact, it's almost impossible that I did make it exactly like they did because we don't have a recipe. All that we have is a list of a few ingredients, and we have some records of how the texture would have been. So, I try to make it clear because I'm not a professional historian, I'm not a professional chef by any means, and I try to make it clear that this is my best guess. This is my version of things. And you know, sometimes people online will correct me, and happy to be corrected. And then sometimes people will say, "No, Pramnian wine was exactly like this." Well, you don't know that because
No.
nobody knows that. So you know, so it's kind of with things like that. It's you just gotta make your best guess and then have fun because it's supposed to be fun. You know, I'm not going to sell this stuff in a store. It's supposed to be fun.
Well, I
And
mean,
really
it sounds like a possibility. So it's like it's very medicinal, right? So
yeah.
this will cure all sorts of things. But I noticed in that same video you mentioned Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which later I was watching a video you were doing about Alfred the Great and these sort of oat cakes. And it's funny because there's a video game coming up called Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is all about the Viking raids during Alfred the Great's time. And I only was able to cover it a little bit in history and games. So I was really happy that you had this video about making these cakes. But there's this very odd, almost random story about Alfred the Great who's pushing back the Vikings, but it's not going well. He goes off to hide in like the marshes or something, and he comes across a peasant's house, and the wife of this, I forget what it was, like a swineherd or whatever, like allows him to stay and hide out. And he has one job. He's supposed to look after these cakes and make sure they don't burn. And he goes and stares off in space. And she comes back and she's like, "My cakes are burning. You had one job." And he's like, "Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that." And it's like it's like this entertaining story, but it is so random. Can you tell me about sort of like how you came across this story and why you're like, I gotta try this recipe?
So that story was, like I mentioned, something that I already knew because I love history. So I knew the story, and excuse me, and so I wanted to tell the story, and I was like, well, let me recreate oatcakes possibly the way that they would have been created back then. It's an interesting story because, I mean, it's almost definitely apocryphal. There's almost no way that that actually happened. You know, a lot of stories, especially the Anglo-Saxons, were all about telling these stories that had a moral or something. But then it's like figuring out, well, what is the moral of this story? You know, there's a really great story about a later king called Canute the Great, who was a Danish Viking who came over and took over England in the early 1000s and 1000s, 11th century.
There you go.
And there's a story about he took his Witan, who's like all of his advisors, and he took his throne and he set it down in the sand by the sea, and he commanded the waves to, or the tide to not come in. He was going to sit there and the tide was not going to come in. Well, surprise, the tide came in and he got his feet wet and they had to move his throne. And that's the story. So now you get to kind of come up with the moral of that story. Was it that he was a fool and he thought he had all this power and he clearly didn't, and, you know, God had the power? Or is it he was showing his Witan, you know what, there are limits even to my power? So it's almost exactly opposite. So you can take whatever you want from these stories.
Sure. I'm sure he was like, oh no, I was totally making a point. It didn't go the way I wanted, but you'll never know. Yeah, because I was thinking about that. I was like, you know, I can't wait for Assassin's Creed Valhalla because, you know, you can get into like Viking rap battles and you get to like drunken archery contests and all these things. I'm like, but will we have a cooking contest with Alfred the Great to see who doesn't burn cakes? Like, can we have like a cooking mama thing where you have like a little cook-off? I mean, I think that would be freaking hilarious. I have no idea if they'll reference this in the game, but I will be so disappointed if they don't.
I hope so. I'm curious how, because it's going to be the first Assassin's Creed that I've actually played. Usually I watch my fiance play them because I have like, I'm not great at these types of fighting games. I get very frustrated, but I love the time period so much that I'm going to play this one on easy mode. But I know that it kind of, you're a Viking, so it's the Vikings' point of view.
Yeah.
How much are we going to get of the Saxons when the Vikings weren't there? I don't know.
Yeah, the only thing they've hinted at so far is it's going to be told from the main protagonist, and that you're trying to settle in England, and that you know, you won't just be fighting the Anglo-Saxons, you also will be make treaties with them. I don't know if it means you get to pit them against each other. I don't know if it means peacefully. I mean, that whole history is really interesting. You will be going against those fortifications that Alfred the Great built, and the game makes it sound like you'll be way more successful than the actual Vikings were, but it should be interesting.
You know what? The Vikings were pretty successful because even though Alfred pushed them back, they stayed. They were there. They never really left.
Oh yeah, Dane's Law and all that.
Yeah, north of the Danelaw, they were there, and that's why all of those towns and everything have Danish and Norwegian names. So they did all right.
They did all right for themselves. They didn't do too bad. So you've done tons of different recipes so far. What would you say is your favorite that you've made?
I think my favorite that I made is, I really like the syllabub. I loved it because, one, it was very easy. Excuse me. It was very easy. And two, it's sweet alcoholic whipped cream. What's not to like?
Right?
You know?
That combines everything. That's so great.
I also think it would be something that would be great to kind of bring back, like, because you could change the flavors. There could be all sorts of different kinds. You could change the alcohol that goes into them. You know, it could be port or sherry or Gewürztraminer or whatever kind of wine, brandy. And then you could also change, instead of orange blossom water, you could have all sorts of different flavors. I think I'm going to start like a food truck that just sells different types of syllabub.
I'm there. I'll buy it all right now. That is amazing. Just breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got it. It's perfect. Okay, so we talked about the tastiest and best. What was your worst experience so far?
The worst experience would have to be the garum that I made, which was actually the video that kind of got big.
Right, sort of really put tasting history on the map.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so interesting because I didn't make the actual what most Romans would think of as garum, because that is a fermented fish sauce that takes a long time, and the smell is so bad that the factories had to be moved away from cities. And I live in a condo surrounded by other people, and I have a fiance. That was just a non-starter for me. So I made an authentic recipe from ancient Rome, though it's actually from the Byzantine Empire, for like quick garum. And it's basically, do you need garum today? Here, this will do. And so it doesn't have the umami flavors that you'll get with fermentation, but it's very complex. It's more complex than just like salt water. But it was still, the smell was so horrific.
Oh my gosh.
That our house smelled for like 2 weeks. And it's terrible.
Oh no. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's brutal.
I'm no longer allowed to boil fish in the house.
Oh yeah, I get the feeling you won't be doing that one again anytime soon.
No.
So you mentioned when we were talking about Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you're really excited to play that game because you seem to love the Viking era. Is that your favorite historical era, or is there something else that you just love?
So it's definitely one of mine, but it's actually not the Viking era that I love. It's the Anglo-Saxon era, and it's actually the late Anglo-Saxons that I love. Like in those final years before William the Conqueror came over. That's what I love at that transition period. But then I also love Regency England. I think I would have done very well, in a Jane Austen novel.
I love Jane Austen novels.
Yeah.
They're so nice. What is it about those two time periods that you think resonates with you so much?
I honestly don't know. I think that part of it is that transition phase. I love those eras where they're not quite one, they're not quite another. The Anglo-Saxons are falling apart, and they're already being infiltrated by the Danes and the Norse and the Normans. And so it's this period of what's going to happen next. Nobody really knew. And that year 1066 is one of the most interesting years in all of history. The events that happened in that 10-month period were pretty amazing. And then with the Regency period, it's kind of the same. It's the falling away of Georgian England and the powdered wigs and that whole sensibility. When you think of the 18th century, that's falling away, but it's not Victorian yet at all. You've still got this period where nobody is king, really. George III is technically king, but George IV is in charge until his father dies. And you've got Napoleon kind of tearing up Europe and changing the face of politics and diplomacy forever. I apologize for my sweet cat if he's making.
I do not. I love it. It's just so cute. So for those who are listening now, I don't know if that's Jaime or Cersei, but your cat looks like they're trying to read and also play with Pokémon. So yes. it's just kind of the best. What are your favorite food and drink?
Ever? You know what? I think my favorite food would have to be baby back ribs with like really sweet, thick barbecue sauce.
Ooh.
That's what I get for my birthday every year. That's
it's pretty mouth-watering. Okay, favorite drink.
My favorite drink is a gin and tonic or just a gin martini. I really lately I love, though it's hard to find. It's hard to find here. It's something called milk gin, specifically Bertha's Revenge. It's an Irish milk gin.
I've never heard of a milk gin. Is it literally milk and gin, or?
No, the term, now I have to look up and see exactly why it's called milk gin, because I can't remember. It has nothing to do with, like, it doesn't have milk in it. It uses whey alcohol from Irish cow's milk. So it kind of has milk in it, but it's whey alcohol. But it's not
Interesting.
like, it doesn't taste like milk or anything like that. It tastes like the smoothest, like just most beautiful flavored gin you've ever had. I think it won all these awards a couple years ago when it came out, and it's slowly starting to make its way into the US.
Yeah, I drink gin and tonics too, so I'm just kind of familiar with like the usual rotation of like I think it's like Blue Sapphire, and it's like it's the Beef Eaters, and then there's Tanqueray, like all that
Hendrix,
stuff.
Hendrix is really nice. Hendrix is nice because it has, I think it's, I can't remember now, but it has a flavoring in it. Maybe it's cucumber. And so it just kind of throws an interesting flavor into that gin flavor, because sometimes gin can have a little bit of a pine solly taste.
Yes, yes, it can. It can have a bit of a strong, yes, bite to it. So I wanted to ask you about foods that or recipes that you haven't tried that you really want to, because I love Japanese history, and I would love to see some Japanese recipes. Yes, I'm putting in a request.
So I was actually going to say Japanese and Chinese cuisine. Here, let me see if I can't pull out this huge book that I just got.
Yeah, because I'm playing Ghost of Tsushima right now, which is a samurai action RPG, and I noticed that they have sake, but they don't feature a lot of food. And I'm like, oh man, it'd be really cool to sort of see what they would have eaten in the Kamakura era, because it probably wouldn't be what we know as Japanese food today. A lot of it didn't exist. So I'm just saying somebody could educate us on that.
So part of the issue with basically with any food outside of Europe and America is there are a lot fewer recipes. There are some recipes from China, there are some recipes from Japan, some from India. I did an Indian episode recently, and the Middle East, but a lot less. That said, China did a very good job at writing down recipes, but they're so hard to find because a lot of them have never been translated. But there is this cool book that I just got called a soup. I don't know if you can see it. A soup
I
for
said
the Khan.
a soup for the
Khan,
for the
Q-A-N.
con.
And it has a ton of recipes from around like the time of the Mongols. And I just got it, so I haven't dug into it yet, but I'm going to. And then there are a few collections of Japanese recipes, but again, one of the best that would be easiest to recreate a dish from is actually at that time when the Dutch came and settled, or not settled, but came and visited and started trading with Japan. And so you have a lot of Dutch influence. Tempura, for example, we think of it as classically Japanese dish, but really it's a major Dutch infusion of cooking styles. So finding those recipes from much earlier is hard. So there's a lot more guesswork. And for me, most of the history that I know, most of the food that I know is European and American. So it takes a lot more research. Like I mentioned, sometimes I'll research for 5 or 6 hours. Sometimes I'll research for 30. When I did my episode on Indian payasam, it was, the research took me so much longer than usual because I was starting at zero. I had no information in my brain already about the dish, about the culture, about that time period in 12th century southern India. But that was why that's actually my favorite episode to have researched, because it was all new to me. So it was just such a wonderful learning experience for me. And that's why I'm doing this show. I mean, I'm glad to be able to share knowledge, but really it's just to give me more knowledge. I'm like Faust. I'm like, give me all of the learning.
Right?
So,
It's fun. So with that, thank you so much for coming on, Max. Tell everyone where they can find you around the internet, on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera? Promote yourself.
Promote myself. Well, on YouTube, all my stuff is on YouTube. It's youtube.com/tastinghistory. And then on Twitter, I'm Tasting History 1, and on Instagram, I'm Tasting History with Max Miller. And on both of those places, I share other things that I know that aren't necessarily food-based, so they're just facts by Max, just little tidbits of history that I love.
I love that. I will check that out.
Yeah.
That sounds fun. All right. And everyone, you can find History and Games right here on YouTube at Meg Sullivan. It is an audio and visual podcast, so you can find the audio version on almost all audio platforms. Just Google History and apostrophe games like Guns N' Roses, and I come up on everything, iTunes, Stitcher, you name it, I'm there. And of course, for exclusive bonus content, you can only find on my Patreon at Meghan, MEGHAN Sullivan. Thank you, everyone, for watching and supporting me. Thank you again, Max, for coming on. I love your Pokemon. I love your YouTube channel. And this interview has been a lot of fun. And I hope you will join me again sometime in the future. We need to talk more food and history.
Thank you, Meg. Anytime.
All right. Awesome. Okay. Thanks, guys, for joining.